Rural Heritage on RFDTV is brought to you by Rural Heritage Magazine, a bi-monthly magazine featuring articles about farming and logging with draft animal power, small-scale diversified family farming and homesteading, and other aspects of our rich rural heritage. Rural Heritage Magazine, borrowing from yesterday to do the work of today. For subscription information, please call 319-362-3027 or order online at www.ruralheritage.com.
Hi, I'm Joe Mishka. Welcome to another episode of Rural Heritage TV.
So my name is Eric Grunwald. I am the lead interpreter at Scots Bluff National Monument. So national forests are managed by the U.S. Department of the Interior Forest Service, and so those are typically managed for multiple uses, recreation, timber, minerals, that sort of thing, whereas national monuments and national parks are managed by the National Park Service, U.S. Department of the Interior, and usually those are set aside for preservation, conservation. And so the difference between a national park and a national monument, it takes an act of Congress to set aside land to make it a national park, whereas a national monument can be set aside by the president, who uses the Antiquities Act to set aside a piece of land. So it was Calvin Coolidge in 1919 set aside the land to create Scots Bluff National Monument, and it's been a monument ever since. Yeah, so Scots Bluff, like I said, was established in 1919, and it was set aside really for three different reasons. One, because of its association as a landmark on the Oregon, California, Mormon Pioneer, and Pony Express trails. It was also thought to be the highest point in Nebraska when it was established. Turns out that's not true. The highest point is actually where Wyoming, Colorado, and Nebraska meet at that three-corner area. It's quite a bit higher. But the third reason was because of the unique geology. We've got geology of sediments that accumulated here and that were later weathered to form the bluffs that we see here today. What we had was the Rocky Mountains off to the west were weathered and eroded, sediments piled up in different layers. We have a layer of the sediments here are really soft rock, but we do have a layer of capstone, kind of like a limestone formation, and where that capstone overlies these sediments, it's protected the underlying rock from being weathered and eroded. So the reason why we have the bluffs today, where everything around it has been kind of eroded away, is because of that limestone cap rock that protects it from weathering and erosion. The oldest exposed rocks in the monument are about 33 million years ago old, and so yeah, there weren't really humans around at that time, and so we do find evidence of creatures, but we find fossils of ancient mammals, things like oreodonts, where there's also turtles that we find a lot of fossils of. And so yeah, those would be the oldest rocks, are the lowest exposed rocks in the Badlands area of the monument, which is on the north side bordering the North Platte River. Rock hounding, collecting is not permitted in the National Monument. Everything that we find, whether it's a human created object like an arrowhead or a natural object like a fossil, is protected by law.
And it stays where you found it.
It stays where you found it. So yeah, if you were lucky enough to visit the monument and find an arrowhead or something like that, you can take a picture of it and then report it to the rangers and let us know where you found it.
Otherwise, you lose all provenance. You just
if you find something really cool like an arrowhead, well, first of all, when you take it, no one else is going to see it. It's going to sit, in your home. But also, when you take it away from here, it means we can't learn more about its association with this land here.
The story.
Yeah,
the story is gone.
Yeah, the story loses its context. Yeah. We know Native people would have used these as landmarks. There's even evidence to suggest that Native people used Scots Bluff or maybe South Bluff for some ceremonial purposes. So as long as people have been in this area, they've been using these bluffs that are here. Yep, so Scots Bluff National Monument is open year-round. Of course, much higher visitation in the summer. In fact, we're in July right now. July is our busiest month of the year. And over the course of July, we'll probably have something like 30 to 40,000 visitors that come to the monument this month. Throughout the year, we have lately it's been about 175, 180,000 visitors per year.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. So the mission of the National Park Service is to conserve the natural and historic objects for this and future generations. And so some of the ways that we conserve is by educating people about what we have here, because people are more likely to protect things when they understand them better. So that is a big part of what we do, is we interpret the resources that we have, whether it's the geology, whether it's the stories of the immigrants or the native people. We interpret that to our visitors so that they can help us protect these places.
Are you a park ranger?
When people come to Scotts Bluff National Monument, of course, a big draw is to learn about immigrant history. A lot of our visitors come to learn about the Oregon, California Mormon pioneer trails. People also come, of course, to learn a little bit more about the geology. But as far as recreation, we've got a 1.6 mile road that leads to the summit of Scotts Bluff, so that is a huge draw for our visitation. Right now that's open from 9 a.m. Last that people can start to drive up is at 5:30, so that they can be down at 6. Inside our visitor center, we've got some great exhibits that explain about the geology and the use of people of the monument. And right now that's open from 8 until 6 p.m. As far as other recreation, people come here to hike. We've got about 4 miles of hiking trails, the most popular being the Saddle Rock Trail, which is a 1.6 mile hike from the visitor center up to the summit of Scotts Bluff.
Jerry Grunwald from the museum right west of us here, the National Monument Museum, I call it, is here to speak today about the trail and the experiences, and I'm hitting that pretty close. And please give him a hand. He's given us his day free of charge. I traded a little labor with him. I'm going to go up there in a weekend or two and talk to his guests for a trade of a speaker fee. So hope I can make that as good. I know it's not to be as good as his, but that's where the angle we're doing, and he's coming basically free of charge. That was his saying to us, I'll come and do this for you. This also is their wagon here. Doug Hansen restored it, and they park it. They park it behind a big oxen team and Prairie's Conestoga wagon that sets up there. So without further talking out of me, let's turn this mic over to him and Eric and give him a big hand.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. So thanks for having me to speak at your National Stagecoach and Freight Wagon Association. Is this a convention or conference? Conference. Okay, well, thank you. And so I'm going to talk not so much about the freighting or stage side of things. I'm going to talk more about the immigrant experience in this area. So where we're at right now, we're actually just steps away from the route of the Oregon-California Trail. Now, one disclaimer about that is this was the route of the Oregon-California Trail starting in 1851. Before 1851, folks who were traveling to Oregon or California, they would have gone further south through what we today call Rubidoux Pass. But something happened in 1850. Either it was maybe a fur trader, or more likely it was soldiers from nearby Fort Laramie. Well, they wanted to stay close to the North Platte River. That was important so that they had water for their animals and for themselves as well. And so somebody improved a road going through this pass, which we today call Mitchell Pass, so that they could stay closer to the river and get to the fort more efficiently, or get to wherever they were going more efficiently. And once they did that, the immigrants started taking advantage of it. So today we call this Mitchell Pass. It's named after Fort Mitchell, which would have stood about 2 miles west of the pass, and that's named after Robert Byington Mitchell, who was a general during the Civil War, and then he was the commander of the Nebraska district after that time period as well. All right, so we've got people traveling this area on the Oregon-California Trail. Scotts Bluff would have been an important landmark for those people, but it also would have been an important landmark for people who would have been traveling on the north side of the North Platte River, and that would have been the Mormon pioneers who were headed to the Salt Lake Valley of Utah. And then there was something else that happened through the pass here. For just 18 months, 1860, 1861, we had Pony Express riders who would have been traveling through Mitchell Pass as well. So this was an important landmark for travelers in this area. So I wanted to talk to you today a little bit more about these people who would have been traveling on the Oregon-California Trail. And so I've got our wagon here. This is a reproduction or a replica Studebaker wagon. This would have been a typical family wagon for people who were traveling the Oregon-California Trail. Now, who were these people, and what did they bring with them on their journey? So these people, what were their motivations, I guess, is what I wanted to answer. And there was a lot of different reasons why people would have traveled to Oregon or California from their homes. For a lot of people, it was a financial concern. There was free land in places like Oregon. Of course, 1848, we had the discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill in California. And so people were headed to the gold fields in California in 1849, 1850, 1851, into 1852, trying to strike it rich there. People were also traveling during that time because in the 1830s and into the 1840s, there was a financial depression in our country. And so people were just looking for a way to escape the bad financial condition that they were in and try to make it out west. And then people were also traveling for religious reasons. Either they wanted to go out to the Indian Territory and try to convert people to Christianity, or, like the Mormon pioneers, they were trying to escape religious persecution by traveling to the Salt Lake Valley of Utah. And then I would say one of the biggest reasons why people traveled west was just out of a sense of adventure. We have a lot of what we called serial movers. So these were people who maybe their family started out in Pennsylvania, and then they moved further west to a place like Indiana, and then they moved further west to a place like Iowa, and then they moved further west to maybe Oregon Territory as well. So we see a lot of that as well. So those are kind of the motivations for why people would travel the Oregon-California Trail. Now I wanted to talk more about what they brought with them inside a typical family wagon like this. So there would have been, different types of wagons that people had as a family wagon. So if you operated a farm, you already had some sort of farm wagon, and so you would convert that farm wagon to your traveler or emigrant wagon. But some of the names of wagon makers during that time that were pretty popular amongst the emigrants would have been Studebaker out of South Bend, Indiana, and then Joseph Murphy was a wagon maker out of St. Louis. Those would have been two of the most popular types of wagons on the trail. And we do have a Murphy wagon replica up at the monument as well. If you get a chance to check that out, come on and see it. It's right there in Mitchell Pass. So a typical family wagon like this, you could fit about 1,600 pounds to maybe about 2,000 pounds of stuff inside the wagon. So what exactly did they put inside the wagon? Well, you would need anything that you needed to start your new life in Oregon or California. So if you planned on doing some farming, you might have some smaller farm implements that you put in here, maybe some seeds that would go in the wagon. If you planned on heading to the gold fields in California, you might have mining supplies like pans and picks, shovels, that sort of thing. But whatever you needed to start your new life, you would have inside the wagon. You would also have some spare equipment as well. So you might have extra wagon spokes that you could use to fix a broken wagon wheel. Some people even would bring an extra axle with them, or even an extra tongue with them as well, which is hard to believe. It would take up a lot of room. There'd be a lot of weight in the wagon, but people would bring those as well. You would also have inside your wagon mostly food, whatever you needed as you survived, because just weren't really any places to get food along the way. You had to be really self-sufficient, and so most of the weight inside the wagon would be food. So let's talk about what these people brought with them as they traveled further west. So it would be food that wouldn't spoil, or it would be harder to spoil at least, and so you would have barrels that would be filled with flour. Some people recommended bringing about 200 pounds of flour per person, and so that's a lot of flour that you'd have inside your wagon. You might have sacks of dried beans, sacks of rice that you would bring with you. You might have barrels filled with cornmeal. You might have crates that would be packed with bacon. The bacon would be a cured meat that hopefully wouldn't spoil, but you would also pack it in a grain like bran to keep the air off of it. And so they would recommend bringing like 100 pounds of bacon on your trip. And so based on what they brought with them, maybe some dried fruit, dried vegetables, pickles, that sort of thing, it would be a pretty monotonous diet that you would be eating on the trail. So you'd be eating a lot of pancakes and bacon, bread and bacon, cornbread and bacon, over and over again. In fact, one of the most discarded foodstuffs on the trail ended up being bacon, which is hard to believe. I love bacon, but people were just so sick of it, and so people had packed so much of it, you couldn't even trade it with somebody else to get something else because there was just so much of it on the trail. So you'd see piles of bacon along the Oregon Trail. Now, besides the foodstuffs themselves, You would need the supplies to be able to prepare meals, and so they would have things like Dutch ovens, frying pans, ladles, that sort of thing, tin cups, tin plates, utensils. All that would be inside the wagon. And then as far as what they drank on the trail, well, you can see I've got my nice water keg here. And so you might travel with a little tin cup and just fill it up right at the source of water, whether it was the North Platte River or a spring. But if you knew there was a dry stretch of trail coming up, you might fill up your keg and then you've got some water to drink. Now, if you wanted to drink something besides just water on the trail, you would probably bring one of these. So I've got my coffee grinder there, and so you would grind up your roasted beans, make some cowboy coffee, and that would be a change of pace from drinking the normal water. You might also bring sugar with you for a little bit of sweetness out there on the trail. And so one of the things that they noticed on the trail was that the people who drank coffee or tea on the trail didn't seem to get sick as often. And can anyone think about why that might be? They were boiling their water, which it's hard to believe that a lot of people didn't really put two and two together and figure out what that was, but they did notice that the people who drank coffee or tea on the trail didn't seem to get sick as often. And so coffee or tea would have been an important resource, important drink on the trail for those immigrants. Now, you would prepare your meal typically on a fire that would be made out of this fuel, right? Now, out here on the plains, today we see a lot of trees in this area because they were planted by people who settled here for shade. But back then, during the immigrant years, there would have been a lot of trees on the trail. And so you might collect some driftwood down by the river, but most typically, the children who you were traveling with would be collecting fuel in the form of these buffalo chips. Now, at that time, of course, gender roles were very important. So you would travel about 15 miles each day with your wagon train, and each wagon train would have about 4 to 5 wagons in it. Now, there were some wagon companies that started out, they thought they were going to have a wagon train of about 100 wagons. Well, it turns out it's pretty hard to travel with 100 wagons, and so those big trains would get split up into smaller groups. So about 4 or 5 wagons in the typical wagon train. Once you got to camp each day after traveling about 15 miles, they would form their camp. The men would go out, graze the animals, and then the women and the girls would cook that evening's meal. After they ate the meal, there might be, tending to the animals' hooves for the men to do. The women might, clean up the dishes. Then they might mend clothing. There's a lot of work to be out on the trail. So pretty long days, whether it was walking or mending clothing. And people did typically walk. You didn't travel in the wagon because it would have been filled up with too much stuff. And so, like I said, you'd be walking about 15 miles a day. The only people who were allowed to ride in the wagon typically would have been maybe a pregnant woman or a woman who had just given birth, or maybe it was someone who was very sick or very injured. But I'm sure you guys are familiar with these wagons. There's not much of a suspension to them, so it would not have been a very comfortable ride. And I've read accounts of women who had just given birth that were allowed to ride in the wagon, and after about an hour of being jostled around the wagon, they said forget it, and they just walked with the baby instead of riding in the wagon. So it would have been a lot of work on the trail. Now, we talked about how people would drink coffee or tea on the trail, and because it would keep them from getting sick. But there was a lot of illness on the trail, unfortunately. And unfortunately, there was a lot of death as well. In fact, some historians say that if you took every grave of every person who died along the trail and you spread them out evenly, there would be a grave about every 50 yards or so. So 2 per football field along the trail. But they did bring some medicine with them to hopefully ward off disease. And I wanted to talk just really briefly about some of the medicine that the people would bring with them. Number 1, good medicinal whiskey, right? You could use this for any number of ailments. And they were typically pretty good about not drinking just for the sake of drinking. In fact, one of the few days that they would often pull out their medicinal whiskey for a celebration would be on the 4th of July, because they were typically on the 4th of July when they were traveling trail. So you've got some medicinal whiskey here. Now, if you had an upset stomach, one of the medicines that people typically traveled with would have been peppermint oil. And even today, if I go home and I visit my family and I tell my mom, oh, I've got an upset stomach, she'll have me suck on a piece of candy cane or piece of peppermint candy. So this peppermint oil is going to help to calm your stomach if you've got a stomachache. Now, if you're feeling a little bit backed up, a little constipated, you might take a little bit of castor oil, and that'll help clear you out. So that would be another common medicine. If you were having chapped lips or dried skin or sunburn or something like that, you might use a little bit of glycerin for that ailment. And then a medicine that you may have heard of that would have been pretty common at that time, it's an opiate, would have been laudanum. So it would have been basically a painkiller. So laudanum is basically grains of opium in an alcohol base. And I've read one particular immigrant journal, a woman's journal. She said, and I don't understand why they did this, but they kept their bottle of laudanum kind of hanging off the outside of their wagon. And one of the kids was really curious about this bottle of laudanum, and they would go and touch it, and they would get their hand slapped. But unfortunately, at some point, that kid got into that laudanum. They drank the whole bottle of laudanum, and so, of course, that was very dangerous, and so they had to have a funeral out here on the trail, and so that, unfortunately, that child died. But like I said, death was pretty common on the trail. Just a couple other medicines that they might bring with them. You've got lemon powder, and this could be used as a source of vitamin C to ward off scurvy, but it's also something that's going to make your water taste a little bit better.
This program is available for purchase. To order your copy, please call 319-362-3027 or visit www.ruralheritage.com. Rural Heritage is a bi-monthly magazine dedicated to draft animal farming and logging, as well as other aspects of our rich rural heritage. It is published by Mishka Press, which also offers a complete line of back-to-the-land books, DVDs, and calendars. Call or write for a catalog or subscription information, or visit our website at www.ruralheritage.com.